Okay, today's lecture is on social psychology. This is what I have my PhD in. I'm going to break it into at least a couple of parts, but I think I have four major areas on your review that I'm going to go through. Now, social psychology comes from what it sounds like, sociology and psychology. If I put these two together, I get a marriage between sociology, which focuses kind of on groups, and psychology, which focuses on an individual's thoughts and feelings and our behaviors, the things we've been talking about. If I put those two things together, then social psychology is the study of how our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, that green part is the psychology part, are influenced by other people. How do other people influence us? Sometimes this field is called social influence or group influence. Okay, so the first area is called social facilitation. Social, group, facilitate. The group helps your performance. Not always, but in some cases, groups help you do a better job. Now, Triplett in 1898 had this really simple experiment. He would give you a fishing rod and reel. You would have to throw it out a certain length. He measured it, and then he would say, reel it in as fast as you can. And so that was the measurement. Now, you either did it alone or in a group setting, and lo and behold, you do it a little bit faster in the group setting. A lot of this is competition. You can see how fast they're going. It's your ego. But whatever it is, especially if you're an athlete, you should listen up. Other people give you energy. You know this when you're fixing to go out onto the field, etc. Okay, and so that energy in this case is helping out, but this task is not that hard. And so what they started to find early on is that energy does help you out. Group facilitates your performance, but mainly for simple tasks, for things like reeling in a fishing line or running or something that's repetitive. For complex tasks, it's like adrenaline rush might get in your way, like if you have to do an algebra problem. So a simple task might be running, a complex task at the Olympics might be like the balance beam. Okay, a lot more pressure on you. It's a more complicated routine you have to do. Now, one of the complicated tasks or complex task out there is baseball. Hitting a baseball in the major leagues is a hard thing to do. Like the benchmark is 300. That means 30% of the time you get a hit, which means 70% of the time you fail when you're good. Okay, so let me get all this off of here. So what they've done as statisticians is look throughout the baseball season. This is my problem from game 1 to 162 in the regular season. It's like, damn, that's a lot of games. You know what I mean? I don't care what happens right in here. It's like, but when they look throughout the season, when the crowds get bigger over here, if this makes sense, and you get closer to the World Series, that the pressure gets higher and your batting average drops over time in these high pressure situations. If you don't believe me, here's real statistics from 1997 all the way to 2016, and it consistently shows this happens regardless of team. Now, I have this for the Astros, but maybe it's not a good example because they got caught cheating, but you can see Jose Altuve, his away versus home. Well, away, you have a lot more pressure on you, and the fans are screaming and yelling at you and like all kinds of other things. Okay, another source of energy besides competition is evaluation apprehension. So your competition is driving you, but also you're worried about what other people are going to think of you, right? Especially if you're a star or you're an athlete. It's like, oh my God, he blew the game. And so you have added pressure is what I'm trying to say. And so all this added pressure sometimes can cause you to crumble on a complex task, or you can be clutch and you can rise to the occasion, kind of like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, someone like this. Okay, so the last thing I usually talk about is most of the time when I go to a concert, I never see like the musicians go, oh my God, there's so many people. It's causing me a lot of energy. I can't do the show. I know, actors and comedians get real nervous, but one of the things they're able to do is to ride the lightning, is to take that energy. And this is where that clutch time comes in. It's like instead of letting the energy break you, is to use the energy. That's when I do my best and ride the energy instead of being afraid of the energy. I hope this first section made sense. Okay, the second one is deindividuation. It's just like it sounds. When you get in a group of people, a lot of times you lose your sense of self. Your individuality is compromised. And so you get lost in the group. I call it mob mentality because you get lost in the herd or the mob. And so just like at an ASU football game or something, you get lost in the, mob mentality and get caught in the moment. So here is my formal definition. You lose your self-awareness. Why? Because you're in a group and you don't really think you're personally accountable. That means it's not really my fault that everybody was doing it. I know I was in the group, but it's like everybody got carried away and it was the group. Because they usually do some kind of antisocial behavior. Not always. We'll talk about when they do something good and de-individuate for good purposes. But most of the time people, unfortunately, de-individuate and it turns out bad. Now, like I said, when you get into the group and the group goes and does something bad and you go, well, who did it? It's like, well, we did it, but we're really not responsible. Now, maybe none of this makes sense, but I have this example. It's happened a lot, but maybe you've heard of this band called The Who. I love The Who. And back in 1979 in Cincinnati, Ohio, they were going to have this big concert. They did have a big concert there. And at the beginning of the concert, before the concert, they only let a few people in and through certain doors. And what happened is 11 people got killed in the stampede as people tried to rush the doors to go in. Now, the group did it. And later on, when the police show up, it's like, who are we going to take to jail? It's like, nobody, because whose fault is it? The group's? It's like, and I don't think at an individual level you're murdering somebody, but this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about, where it's like, yeah, you were a part of the group, so you were responsible, right? It's like, no, we were just all running through there. And so hopefully I'm making sense. If we were in class, I would show some videos about this. Now, what I think about de-individuation is normally when you're alone or in small group settings, you can kind of shine, but in these group settings where it gets real big, we all become just like interchangeable parts. Another brick in the wall. Don't make me go Pink Floyd right now, but we can go there. Now, the last thing I'll say about this is normally we have these two things. We talked about them last time. We know social rules, or even if nobody's looking, we know that it's wrong to do. But what I argue is when you lose your sense of self, you also kind of lose those leashes and they kind of go away. And so you get a whole bunch of people at this primordial level just roaming around ready to do bad things. Now, the first study I will mention is Zimbardo's hood study. Why do I call it the hood study? Because women came in and wore hoods and robes. Women. Okay, so here's the actual picture. I don't know if you can see it over here. It's not the best picture. Now, in another day, let's just say women came in, were identified. So here's like there's no covering over your face, and it's like, hey, my name is whatever. Okay, so now what happens as a part of the study is later on, once you're either in the robes or in the name tag, they don't see each other, it's not on the same day, you're given an opportunity to shock somebody. Now, you don't really shock them, but it's like the person does a pretty good job acting like they're getting shocked. And so you can either shock someone who's previously been mean to you or nice to you. Now, in either condition, like maybe here it's like, well, they'll know it's me, and here they won't know it's me. So see, de-individuation, this is individuation over here. They're completely individuated. Okay, so the mean or the nice lady. Here's the findings of the study. The hooded subjects do shock more often, but they press the button twice as long as the ladies with the name tags. And furthermore, this is the one that I want you to remember for the test, is they shock the nice and the mean lady the same amount. If they only shock the mean lady, then I would just go with the revenge study and I'll get back at somebody when they don't know it. But now I'm going to hurt nice people. And if you really think about what this study is about, unfortunately, I grew up in this part of the country, these knuckleheads, right? Because they don't go out and hurt, let's say, black people in broad daylight by themselves. No, they get into groups and then they de-individuate. They all wear costumes, so they look at like interchangeable parts where they can hide their identity, right? And they do it at nighttime. So all three of these things serve to de-individuate, which makes it easier to hurt nice people. I wish I could be in class because then I would go into the whole Django Unchained example, but I can't do it right now. Okay, this is the second study. I call it the trick or treat study. Ed Diener and his associates in 1976 did this in Seattle, Washington. So all they did was wait at their door and wait for trick or treaters to show up. Did you show up alone or in a group? Think about Halloween. You roam around in groups, you conceal your identity at nighttime. It's not the KKK, but they're using the same three de-individuation tactics. All three kind of lead to that. Now, when they showed up, what Ed and his associates would do is either ask the kids their names, all of their names, or not ask. So in this condition over here, you showed up in a group and you didn't get asked your name, so you're an anonymous group of kids. Right here, you are alone and you just said your name. Even if you have a costume on, you've just individuated yourself. I hope you're following me now. And what they would do is say to the kids, oh my goodness, I think my phone is ringing. It's 1976. I'm going to go inside and set the candy down. I only have a little bit of candy tonight, so y'all kids just take one apiece so that everybody can get some. And then they go inside. Now what happens? Look right here. The kids that are in groups and that have concealed their identity and not been asked their names right here, over half the time they break that rule. The kids who were alone, over 90% of the time when they said their name, they followed the rule because they had been outed or individuated. Now, one of the studies I usually talk about is this one guy would study jumpers, like people that jump off of buildings to kill themselves. And he would notice this thing called suicide baiting. I usually go into this in class. It's weird. But this happens in bigger cities where it's nighttime and the crowd is real big, and then they start chanting jump, jump, jump. It's not just you alone down there. This is where I usually show the other guys. I don't know if you've seen the other guys with Will Ferrell, but it's like if it was just you alone, then it's your fault. But if like 100 people are saying jump and the guy jumps off, then same thing with the who. Who do you take to jail? Okay, so too many who's in a row. One of the things I focus in on is wartime and uniforms and how boot camp should be called de-individuation camp. It should be a de-individuation camp. I don't care if it's the Nazis or if we go into some other military. They all look identical. They take away your individuality and build you back up as an interchangeable part of a team. I agree with this. I think it's a good thing because when you get onto the battlefield, you're going to have to do these acts of war, and you can't have a weak link in the chain. Individuality might lead to this. And so when I talk about this whole thing, I thought I had my eraser on here. One of the things I talk about that I never understood is when you had a bunch of people over here and they de-individuate and they march against all these people over here who de-individuate, and then we just shoot towards each other. It doesn't make sense, you know what I mean? And that's where guerrilla warfare came around, because if we de-individuate and I kill you, then I'm just killing an interchangeable part. Think about Vietnam, the word Charlie. We're just killing Charlie. They're all Charlie because they all look alike. Now, in the new wars, they've used words like Habib and stuff like this, because you're just killing the same person. No, you're not. You're killing an individual that has a name, but it makes it a lot easier if it's not an individual. And so what happened is the enemy got smart and they said, hey, we're going to stop de-individuating. And that way, when you come in, Americans, U.S. soldiers, you're not going to know who to shoot. And maybe you've seen American Sniper, and the very first scene is all about this. Okay, because now we are individuated and nobody looks like a soldier. But you look like soldiers, so we exactly know who you are. Look at all the newer movies about the wartime that goes on in the Middle East. Is de-individuation always a bad thing? I hinted earlier that it's not always a bad thing. Okay, so we're seeing de-individuation for these horrible reasons reasons, but sometimes I think in America we're too individuated. Everybody's got to be a celebrity or star, have their own YouTube channel, although I have mine, you know what I mean? And this, that, other. But I like the old school teams that the name wasn't on the back of the jersey here. You know what I mean? It's just about the team because there's no I in team, right? It's that whole I word that becomes the bugaboo a lot of times with good teams. And if you're an athlete, you know what I'm talking about. And so I usually focus on this we concept because we're in psychology. And if I focus on I too much, I don't know if I have this on here. Yes, I do. The Hopi who live right here in Arizona, circle this, right up on Third Mesa. It's like the Hopi don't have any word for I or me. They only have words for we or us. I thought this was a myth, but one time I had a Hopi lady in my class and I asked her about it. Her name is Timmy, which is great because my name is Timmy. And says, Timmy, is this true? And she goes, it is true, Tim. We don't have a word for I or me. I'm just going to show you this quote. And she looked right at me and said something else. And she says, Tim, you know what else we don't have a word for? And I was like, what is it? She says, it's love, because love's not something you say with your mouth. It's something you demonstrate as an action. God damn. And so this comes back to me when I really think about it. If I serve myself, I'm focused on I, and I get real individuated. And when I serve on others, I get other focused and less focused on me. I don't know if you know Tim Tebow. I love him. But one time they were asking him, Tim, it's like, how do you maintain your ego? Because you're like, famous, you have all this money, don't let it go to your head. And he says this, it's not that I think less of myself. I just think of myself less often. That makes sense. Okay, that's why I want to be the giving tree. I'm not always like this, but Mother Teresa says the true meaning of love is to give until it hurts. So fuck all the shit about codependence. It's like, I'm going to help people. You know what I mean? If they need help, if they're cold, I'm going to try to help them out. And so that's just the way I'm going to do it. I hope you like this part of the lecture. Okay, number 3 is destructive obedience. It's pretty straightforward like the other two. You obey authority even when it ends up harming others. We're taught to obey authority. Follow what the police say. Do this, but then it gets extreme sometimes. Think about the Nazi regime and how people, I was just following orders. It's like, yeah, well, at a certain point that becomes damage. So this following orders, I forgot I had this Nazi propaganda. A lot of social psychology came out of trying to understand the group influence of the Nazis. So Stanley Milgram did this study. If you haven't heard of it, it's probably the most famous study ever done in psychology. It's done a long time ago, so we couldn't recreate it now. But anyway, there was 2 people that showed up, a teacher and a learner. Now, the learner was always the accomplice of the experimenter. He was in on it. You didn't know this. This is the real participant right over here. He always got the role of the teacher. Now, the teacher was to teach the learner, I don't know why he didn't call him student, a list of words like blue girl, nice day, green grass. I don't know if those are exactly ones, but if I said green, you're supposed to say what went with it, grass and not girl, right? And so if you look at this, the catch is the teacher would give the learner a shock every time they got one wrong. Now, I've told the learner, because he's in on it with me, to get a lot of them wrong. Now, the other catch, first things first, the teacher was actually put into the chair, the real person, and they gave him a 45-volt shock. So to show how it worked, and it hurt really bad, so now they put the learner, the accomplice in the chair. It's up to you. Every time he misses one, I want you to increase the voltage also from 0 to 450. Now, they want to see how many people will obey and take the shock all the way to 450 volts. Now, if you looked at the setup right here, you have the experimenter as the authority figure right here. And here's you. the real subject, and here's the student who's an actor. Now, you've just been sat in this chair and you had a 45-volt shock, but after you leave and they put the other guy in the chair, they turn the electricity off. He's just an actor yelling and screaming. So if none of this makes sense, I'm fixing to show the actual footage from the experiment, and then I'll come back and try to explain it.
What's going to happen, what you're supposed to do. The teacher will read a list of word pairs to you like these.
In Milgram's study, subjects were paid to participate in what they were told was an experiment on the effects of punishment on learning. Subjects were told that they would be the teacher. They were instructed to ask questions of a respondent in an adjoining room. The respondent, or learner, was actually an accomplice in the study. The experimenter stood by to act as an authority figure.
Begin.
Blue girl. Nice day.
The subject presented the learner with a set of word pairs that the learner was expected to remember. The learner was then given a stimulus word along with 4 other words.
Green. Grass, hat, ink, apple. Answer, please.
His task was to recall which of those 4 words was originally paired with the stimulus word. The respondent indicated his choice by pushing a button corresponding to one of the 4 words. If the wrong answer was given, the experimenter ordered the subject to administer an electric shock to the learner. The shock started at 15 volts and progressed up to 450 volts, indicated on the control panel as danger, extreme shock.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105 volts.
The respondent, of course, was not actually receiving the shock. To the subject, however, the learner was experiencing more and more pain.
Dance.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let me out of here. You have no right to keep me here. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let
Go
me
on.
out. Let me out.
Responsible for it. Red. That is incorrect. This will be at 3:30. The correct phrase is rich
Let me out of
boy.
here. Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let me out, I tell you. Let me out of here. Let me out of here. You have no right to hold me
The
here.
next phrase is fast.
The surprising and disturbing results of the Milgram experiment reveal how obedience can take precedence over moral sense. Many subjects initially showed reluctance to administer shock, especially when the learner complained about a heart condition and the increasing level of pain. But in the end, 2/3 of the subjects obeyed authority and administered the highest level of shock, 450 volts.
The answer is duck. 435 volts. It says danger, severe shock here. Next X on the next one.
Continue, please.
435 volts. Next one, brave. Woman, soldier, dog, horse.
These subjects were ordinary, well-intentioned people. Conformity and obedience are obviously powerful forces.
Okay, I hope the movie kind of illuminated what happened in the study a little bit for you, but I have this curve down here because when they asked psychologists, they said, oh no, people are going to start dropping out like flies whenever he starts screaming. Well, that didn't happen. 65% of the people went all the way to 450 volts. Majority of people, remember that for the test, majority, 2/3, 65% went all the way, and then people are going, oh my God, what's wrong with people? They've replicated it with all kinds of people. And so what their argument is that we follow orders when we're told to, especially from scientists, doctors, policemen, and I don't know if that's a good cop-out, but that's what their explanation is. Now, to piggyback on that explanation, one of the guys I worked with talked about personality and how in weak situations you can be yourself. Why? There's not a lot of rules for your behavior. You go to the club, you go to the coffee shop, you can be loud, quiet, whatever, all in between. In a strong situation, on the other hand, there are rules for your behavior. Let's just take church, for example. There's a rule to be quiet. If you come in and everybody's being really quiet, that's not their personality. That's their following the rules. And so these rules sometimes overwhelm your personality. And this is what they try to argue in these studies, is that the presence of the authority figure, I don't know how y'all are when the 5-0 gets around, but if the popo's around, like, okay, I'm just going to do what I'm told, I might not think, and it overwhelms what I naturally would do. I don't know if that's a good enough explanation for you, but especially if you get into wartime situations where the situation gets completely strong, and I think I have this example. In this movie, Tobey Maguire has to do something horrible on the battlefield, kill somebody. When he comes home, he should just go, oh, strength of the situation. I'm not at the coffee shop. You know what I mean? It's like there was a lot of rules for behavior, and it's like, it's not my personality, but he can't. He still kind of takes it on as a part of his personality. And so the last two people, speaking of the war, are these two guys right here, both knuckleheads. This guy, Adolf Eichmann, tried to use the cop-out, oh, just following orders. It's like, yeah, but you called yourself the minister of death, in the Nazi death camps. You liked killing those people. This guy over here, court-martialed, just following orders. No, you weren't, Callie. You just went through the village of My Lai and you massacred 300 innocent men, women, and children just for the fun of it. And so even in war, we hold people accountable and say it's their personality and not the strength of the situation. Okay, I'll see y'all next time, and we'll go into number 4.